Good morning, Boquete. Good morning, Chiriquí. Buenos dias. It's a beautiful day here in Boquete. It's sunny, it's breezy, and I hope that nobody flew away during those gusty winds last night. Some of those winds were almost, I would say, almost hurricane strength, but I didn't see any roofs going down the road this time. Sometimes you can get a roof or two blowing down the road, but everybody seems to be intact. But barely a cloud in the sky. I'm sure we'll get some in a bit. Always seems to happen around 3 p.m. So I am here today with the same guest that was on our show yesterday, Mr. Daniel Gallagher. He is a retired Master Sergeant of the Marine Corps. First Master Sergeant. sorry. I'm not really good with the titles.
That's okay.
I prefer names to titles,
okay.
but
That's okay.
You deserve all of your title that you're due. So first Master Sergeant, correct?
First sergeant.
Oh, just a first. Okay, first
Just
sergeant.
a step above.
Just a step above. I don't want to
That's
dock
okay.
your rank either.
It's not a problem. I'm no longer any of that. So
It's part of your history.
it is.
Once a Marine, always a Marine.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. Anyways, you're also a psychologist, a licensed psychologist in the U.S.
Yes.
Here, you
reality therapist.
reality therapist
is the only license I still carry in the United States.
Okay. And can you explain to us a little bit about what a reality therapist is?
Sure. When you graduate from college and you sit for your licenses, you choose the type of therapy you want to do.
Okay.
There are therapists that go back, Freud.
Right.
There's therapists that would go back to the beginning of time and determine that a person 60 had problems when he or she was 2. A reality therapist only wants to deal with the issue of the day.
Okay.
What is happening to you right now, the last 6 months, and how can I help you be the whole person you want to be? That's our main focus. We can, in fact, go back, but our focus is really, mine was a 6 months period. I felt that if no one was getting better, if a client, a patient was not getting better after 6 months, then perhaps I wasn't doing the kind of quality work I should be, and they might need a transfer to someone else.
So basically, you're dealing with a person's current issues.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily what they went through in childhood
Not at
and
all.
growing up. It's more like you are here where you are today. You have X problems, and let's work on resolving those problems to get you to where you want to be.
That's absolutely right. That's correct.
Okay. So we planned on talking a little bit about PTSD.
Absolutely.
In general first, for example, how does someone get PTSD?
So the old theory was it was just a wartime issue. You would be in battle. You might be in many battles, as my friends and I were, but one particular battle just became a part of your psyche inside your brain. That caused some issues. Post-traumatic stress disorder, even if you're no longer in those battles, even if you've been 20 years since you've been in the military, then what happens is a period of time during the year, multiple periods or one, you will feel the same sense of dread and inability to move and fear as you felt when you were actually in that battle. Everything, all the feelings will come back to you. Post-traumatic stress disorder, we're now finding, and we're going to talk about that, but we're not finding it doesn't have to be one event. It can be multiple events. It can be abuse. It can be one assault or multiple assaults. So PTSD is simply the trauma that you've never been able to overcome in an incident that happened in your past.
Can it be any type of trauma, or is it some kind of trauma that makes you feel like your life is in danger?
No, today what we're finding out is it can be any type of trauma. Right now, people are dealing with the effects of COVID.
Right.
It's changing habits and lifestyles, and that is a long-term effect of, and people are describing post-traumatic stress symptoms now.
Now, we've seen that a lot within the medical community, those that work in hospitals and
Yes.
clinics and what have you, and not just with COVID, but just with any type of situation where they're day in, day out seeing terrible things. ER workers, especially in the inner cities in the States, and that kind of thing. Those people also are prone to having symptoms of PTSD.
They truly are having symptoms. I have 2 hospitals that I deal with healthcare workers that work in the hospitals, mostly through WhatsApp. They've increased that, without my knowledge, to 5
Wow.
in the New England area, mostly in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, which is fine. They describe symptoms of PTSD. The difference is, and it's kind of the reason I continue to push mask if I see somebody that doesn't have them on, or distancing, is because these people are not giving themselves time to mourn the deaths of their patients, which is multiplied by 10, nor are they giving themselves time to heal from PTSD symptoms. They simply will stop, take a break, and feel the symptoms of dread and PTSD. It's mostly related to patients. I don't know if Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so is going to make it today. But long-term effects is a different story. They're feeling isolated. They're actually feeling now like America didn't listen to science, and people are simply dying because they don't want to keep everyone healthy.
And I know in some cases we actually feel resentment also towards the public because they're not exactly cooperating at times, because they all have their own opinions, their own views, but we see it day in, day out. We see what it does to people, we see what it does to families, and we feel helpless to stop it. And there's other people that, we get angry if we see people that are just blatantly disregarding the CDC and the WHO, the recommendations.
Yes.
And so that also builds up resentment towards patients sometimes, and we don't like to feel resentment towards anybody.
No, that's a really absolutely true. And nurses, doctors, healthcare workers in general,
Even the janitors in the hospitals.
absolutely, are trying to avoid those type of feelings. But it comes out in a different way. It comes out with patients who feel so bad that when they finally do have COVID, that they got other people, other family members sick.
Yeah.
Perhaps their grandmother died. So that PTSD can also have a guilt factor to it. Military men who have shot and killed somebody can feel great forms of PTSD because of what they did in the war. Well, the patients that are surviving COVID, what they're putting doctors and nurses and healthcare workers to, and then going back to their families, and perhaps their grandmother or grandfather died, they're feeling an overwhelming sense of loss and guilt at the same time.
I feel fear going home from my job that I'm going to bring something home to
Right.
my family
Right.
and give it to them. And this is a virus that can actually kill.
Right.
And it's indiscriminate. We don't know anymore who it will kill, who's more prone to be dying.
Yep.
And it's a fear that's always on my mind. And sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night thinking, did I do everything I could to sterilize my stuff before coming into the house?
The nurses, mainly the nurses, but a few of the doctors I talk to actually don't. They don't come into the house.
Yep.
They're using their cellar as now their sleeping quarters, or they're simply because they're not only on call, but they're doing 16-hour shifts 7 days a week.
Yeah.
They're actually staying in hotels that have been offered by the state and the city free. So literally the other issue that's going on is the amount of loneliness and sadness they feel, and they feel almost dejected
Yeah.
by society and their family in some way, because they're taking all the precautions in the world, but in all honesty, very few people want to be near them.
And that's a fact.
Yes.
I have neighbors that say, yeah, we're good, stay over
Yes.
on your side of the
Yes.
fence, and we'll stay over. And this is not a hit to anybody.
No.
This is completely understandable, because everybody is taking all the precautions they can to protect themselves and their families. I completely understand. If I'm in my scrubs and I'm walking around town, I understand if someone crosses the road.
Yes.
I understand if someone doesn't want to come to my house and do a job because they know I work in a clinic. I don't take offense, because that's how they have to deal with this.
And those are the people that are truly safe.
Yeah.
The people that feel like that actually are doing all the cautions, even going beyond the cautions that are recommended by the CDC. I feel much safer with those people than I do with people that I see um, in different places, in different venues, that simply wear a mask on their face but
Right.
not on their nose.
Yeah.
So I tend to wear, at the BCP, I do the mail, I tend to wear a face mask and a face shield because I'm more worried about the people that aren't taking it seriously than the people who are taking all the precautions in the world.
Right. And to take precautions is not to live in fear. To take precautions is to protect yourself and to protect those around you.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean you have to live in fear.
Not at all.
No. And we see that there are some people that just refuse to leave their houses because they are afraid and they do feel isolated and they do feel depressed because they're just too scared to go out.
Most people that I deal with are actually thinking in terms of their bubble.
Uh-huh.
And the bubble is simply, I've decided that I can't cope with living without anybody in my life. So if it's just you and your wife, or it's just you, they're finding that they're doing things with mask and distancing, but they're still getting together with a bubble. And that's fine. What you're doing is you're honestly saying that I trust the people around me to not only protect themselves, but myself.
Right.
And that's absolutely fine. And washing the hands should always have been part of our
Always,
culture.
regardless,
Yes.
regardless. You should always be washing.
Yes.
Now, what about the most vulnerable group? We never hear anything about the children that are being affected by the virus, by violence, by doubt.
So the other group I still work with and worked with in my past history is social workers. Social workers are very fearful for their families, especially if there's been a history of violence, a history of abuse of alcohol and drugs. They're very fearful. The requirement in Massachusetts was they visit the family once a month and make phone contact with them more often. Now they're simply not able to do that, or they're doing that a lot less. There's a great fear about those children. I'm sorry, teachers are doing the same thing. Teachers were the second avenue of protection for children. They would visualize them every day. They would see if they're withdrawing, if they had bruises on. They would ask the questions, and by law, they have to report to the police or rural Department of Social Services. So then you add coaches for Little League or things like that. All of those elements have disappeared. It's distance learning. We're doing current studies now on children who are doing distance learning and how they're feeling. We are seeing rage in children as young as 8 years old, unable to cope with ordinary things that they used to doing a puzzle that they used to be able to easily do. Lack of attention span, saying that they don't think that the world will ever be the same again, that they'll never be able to visit their friends or go to school or play baseball or basketball. So this is a generation that's being sorely affected by forms of PTSD because of COVID, and yet they're not treatable because of the circumstances that we now live in.
They are one of the most at-risk groups at the moment because, as you said, there aren't eyes on them all the time outside of their families. Maybe they don't come from an abusive family, but they could still have psychological problems due to COVID. Now, normally in school, when there's a crisis, the teachers and the counselors at that school, as well as the other students, get together. They have debriefings. They try and cope with what's going on. But right now there isn't that kind of support. They don't have that web of support around them to keep them safe, to answer their questions. A lot of times parents are working, they can't answer the kids' questions, and even if they weren't working, a lot of times they still can't answer the questions because nobody has the answers.
It's absolutely true.
And so these kids no longer have a safe spot. They no longer have that feeling of safety, and children have to have consistency. They have to have a schedule. They have to have that feeling of safety. Like, this is what happens every single day. I get up, I have breakfast, I go to school, I see my friends, I come home, I do homework, I play until dinner, and then I have dinner with my family, and then we might do something before bed.
There's also systems of conformity. What teachers have described to me in distance learning is simply students, so they have a class of 12 in distance learning, and before they realize it, 6 of them have just walked away. It's much easier to walk away in your home than it is in a class. There's more repercussions. There's children create their own conformity.
Yeah.
They, and those things are missing too. So parents are trying to keep them in front of a screen to do distance learning, but in truth, parents don't know how much they're paying attention or not. That doesn't even describe the children with ADHD and problems of learning like that. We created a whole society of different types of teaching environments to help students that were on a spectrum to have learning difficulties. Nothing is being done right now. They're just being asked to pay attention to a screen and learn.
And which is really difficult in the best of circumstances.
Absolutely.
And in these circumstances, it's even more difficult. And the teachers don't have the control over the class that they usually do. And they also can't use all the resources, the hands-on resources, the notebooks, the magazines, art classes, stuff that actually draws the attention of the student, gets them involved. And the doing is part of the learning. It's not just looking at a screen, just listening on and on and on. They might participate in those groups sometimes through the Zoom, but it's still not going to be the same. You still just don't get that hands-on group learning environment.
When I worked in Massachusetts, as part of a team, I would be a part of an individual education plan. Part of the education plan is see how children learn, and one of the things we would put in is that children with learning issues, ADHD, things of that nature, can't sit for a 45-minute class. So they were allowed to stand up, they'd have some assistance, and not roam around on their own, but to move around in the classroom or without disrupting, or to move outside the classroom or to do things. Or they had breaks put in the contract. So children who are used to that kind of thing in distant learnings don't have it. And some teachers determine that after 15 minutes of looking at other students that they're wandering, their eyes are wandering.
Yeah.
So we'll ask them to take that break and come back in 10 minutes and ask the parents to bring them back. But other than that, I mean, all of the energy that a child has, none of that is being diminished with distant learning. All of the social cues they got from other students and adults, none of that is being taught anymore. Parents are simply responsible to do everything.
So in other words, they're socializing while they're in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And they learn what is correct and incorrect even from the other students that kind of say, hey, you can't say that, or you can't laugh at that person because they're stuttering or whatever, because you don't have that peer pressure either way, good or bad.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's the beginning of social conformity. You learn to sit and you learn to pay attention, and then you learn to play well with other students. If not,
cooperate in groups.
Right. They simply isolate you, and until you learn to cooperate with that group when you're playing, then other students won't want to do that. So that goes a long way to teaching us how to be adults. That's been lacking for nearly a year now, and perhaps
another year.
Perhaps another year. Certainly, the students may go back to school, but when you talk about Little League and the other social things they do, probably not.
What about all the disruptions where they do start to go back to school, do in-person learning, and then all of a sudden there's a breakout of COVID in their school and they have to stop? What does that do?
That's the feeling of the rug being pushed out from under you. That's the feeling they have of you promised me that I would do something, and now you're taking it off me again. And that's where children,
punishment.
The new learning center, I used to deal with parents and try to explain to them one of the things they do is if they gave one of their teenagers a cell phone and paid for the minutes on it, they simply would, when they were angry or decided a punishment, to take the cell phone off them. Children and young adults don't learn that way. All they know is you took something that you told me was mine. I would suggest to the parents, just take the minutes off them. Don't tell them, just surprise them with it. And then when they come to you, and I apologize for this, when they come to you, I would say to the parents, say this: you've treated me like a piece of shit for 5 days now, and you really think I'm going to put minutes on your phone? Think about that next week when you don't have the minutes, and figure out how you can treat me better, and then I'll give you the minutes back. So by taking them out of school constantly, by bringing them back, by seeing their teachers on television saying they don't want to go up back, they think it's their safety issue, they're getting a lot of messages that they're not sophisticated enough to bring into their brain and figure out for themselves. And they need parents who are just as stressed out because they are losing their job and worried about losing their house and getting enough food for their children, who don't simply have the patience to have these normal conversations that they would have had a year ago.
And do you see that the kids, I know you're not directly in the situation at the moment, but do you see a lot of kids that are just plain scared of getting sick? They've heard so much misinformation, or they've heard all kinds of stories, and they're just plain scared to go out and do anything because they're afraid of getting sick?
Well, their parents start by bringing that. They start by, we can't go to grandma's house because we might make them sick. Then if something does happen to the grandfather or grandfather, they explain COVID, which is very difficult for a child to understand, and they say that grandparents got sick, went to the hospital, and passed away. So children are very conscious in very simple forms of what's happening in society. And they have their own internal fears, and as they process it, and they're having many more nightmares. That's one of the things we're finding from child psychologists, that children are reporting many more nightmares about death and dying. They're reporting many more outbursts, anger outbursts.
And regressive behavior, probably bedwetting.
Absolutely, saying things like, I could die, I'm not seeing my friends because I might kill them, or they might die from me, or I might die from them. I mean, it's going to take a very long time to treat the youngest children and make them feel safe again. I'm not talking about psychology. I'm talking about reinventing, going back to school, reinventing safety for their own feelings of safety. When we go back as a society, we're going to really have to look at the way we interact with children and find the best way we can to make them conscientious adults who can do the right thing for themselves.
Didn't we kind of have the same situation with the children as far as during the Cold War with the bombing and nuclear type strikes and training the children to get into a safe spot, and also the active shooter drills?
I think we did. I think I grew up with the bomb.
Right.
As a 74-year-old, they would tell you to hide under your bed, but nobody explained it. And it was a simpler time where you could just accept what parents say and kind of not worry about it. This is a different society. You get I'm sorry.
No problem.
You have television, they can go on Facebook pages, they can do so many things that shows the world as a more fearful place. They also have parents that think of it as a more fearful place. That transcends itself, and it gets into children's minds. So it's much more difficult for children to cope. Yes, we talk about a more sophisticated society, but in truth, all there is a little boy and girl still. Their brains are still formulating. If you give them fearful things and then don't express or ask them how they're feeling, then they're going to bring those things internal. There are going to be bedwetting and nightmares and angry outbursts and maybe some physical assaultive behavior. That's just they're coping with some of the stress that they feel.
Not having the normal outlets that they normally would. Okay, moving up to a little bit more adolescent age group. The age group that's graduating from high school, the age group that's going off to college, and some are going off into the military to start their military careers, or into the reserves while they're in college. Now, my nephew specifically had a friend, or has a friend, I should say, that was in that situation in the reserves, was deployed, came back to study, and is probably, due to the deployment, suffering from some form of PTSD. Right now, there's not a good system in place with COVID for these people to get the help that they need. The VA, they're probably swamped already, and they also have all the restrictions about how they can see their patients with COVID. Do you have any suggestion for these young people that are in this type of situation?
I do. Actually, we were talking about it earlier offline. Actually, during the Vietnam War, there was very little for vets. Second World War were mostly administrated of the Veterans Administration. There were no laws for us. So there was very little done for us, and we simply backed into our own type of society and decided how we would act and what we would do. We learned from each other, veterans groups, which I've run. Now we're talking about people from the Vietnam era actually now being the administrators. We're talking about congressmen and senators. There aren't as many as there used to be who would actually go to war and come back and be in Congress and Senate. There still are people who sympathize with that. New laws have been done. There's actually, I'm going to give you an 800 number for the Veterans Administration for suicide, depression, or just wanting to ask for information about a problem you have. And that number is 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. So besides the Veterans Administration, besides your veterans hospitals, this is a number manned and paid for by the Veterans Administration to have any veteran in need, whether you're in the service now or whether you're out. So that would be the recommendation I would give. Also, if you're going in service, now the service wants both physically and mentally healthy people to have a weapon. If you state that you're feeling some incidents of PTSD, and it's easy, those signs are very easy, and I'll be happy to give them to you. If you're feeling you have some incidents of PTSD, simply go, if you're in the reserve, simply go to your commander. There's usually a doctor there. There's certainly priests there or rabbis there that serve as conduits to soldiers that are running into some difficulty. So the most important thing you can do is inform them, let them know of what's going on. That way there's a record of how you feel and what's happening to you. There will be counseling offered. There will be people who will see you and try to diagnose you. There will be people who will actually offer you individual therapy. And it's really important that you get that on your record. It's really important. It will not hurt you. It's very private. But if you do have problems in the future, if you do have problems with being unable to work, that record will help you with different kinds of pensions and medication that will be free to you. So the most important thing, if you're in service or you're what we used to call a part-time warrior, is to let someone know and to start the process happening.
Right. It's very important because you shouldn't wait until you get called up to say, hey, I've got this problem. That's not a good time to let your CO know.
If you do that, then you're going to have the problem, not them. They're not going to deploy you, but they're going to question why you waited so long.
Right.
Signs and symptoms of PTSD is nightmares. All of a sudden you're a person that very rarely wakes up in the middle of the night, but all of a sudden you have nightmares, day sweats, getting in your car and driving along and feeling this overwhelming sense of dread. So you have to pull over. The fear is so so intense that you actually feel like your heart is having a heart attack. Those are the signs and symptoms. They can come back on a daily basis with nightmares, or they can come back on a weekly or monthly basis. If you're having especially experiences with nightmare about your service or things that happen, it might not be exactly like it, but if you're having those kind of nightmares and you're having periods where you feel unable to move and you're isolating yourself, that's a clear sign of having forms of PTSD, and you need to be evaluated if you're in the service, or if you're out of the service and you've been out of the service for a long time, but all of a sudden you start having PTSD-like symptoms. You need to go back to the Veterans Administration and see somebody about these things.
And the CO is there to help you. The CO is not there to knock you down. The CO isn't there to say, hey, you're just a weak person.
No.
People that get PTSD are just as strong and as healthy as anybody else, but they've seen some situations that their mind just cannot handle. And what can you ask of an 18-year-old kid that goes off to a war zone, has a gun pointed at them, or is having to point a gun at somebody else and take their life?
Right.
It's,
Go ahead. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Really hard to wrap your mind around that.
That's okay. I personally think, listen, I've treated veterans that had PTSD. I've treated veterans, I have PTSD. I've treated veterans that live a lifetime with it, and work and support their family and try to cope with it, and sometimes live a half of a lifetime without telling anybody. I did. I would save up my sick time so that I would simply tell my wife I wasn't feeling well and isolate. Those people aren't weak. Those people are some of the bravest people I've ever met. Some of the bravest warriors I ever met in service and out of service. Coping with that without getting help is, I believe, foolish, because you could have a better life, but at the same time, there's nothing that isn't about your bravery.
Yeah.
Nothing.
It says nothing about your bravery. It has nothing to do with whether you want to serve, not serve, whether you can serve or not serve, because there are plenty of people that are dealing with this and getting therapy, and they're staying in the service, maybe not deployed until they get the help they need and they're out of the woods, but definitely you can still keep your career. That's not something that you have to worry about, is losing your career.
And the other thing too is that if you're a civilian now in a civilian position, you need to inform your superiors if you are going to counseling. There are laws now that protect you from not being fired or let go because you are feeling symptoms of depression or PTSD. I've dealt with civilians who feel PTSD, and there's no question in my mind that they're some of the bravest people alive, because just to cope with a feeling of doom and death and go on with your life is an important aspect. If you continue to do it alone, about 90% of those people start having suicidal thoughts, and about 10% of those people do commit suicide if they try to do it on their own.
So what is I know we heard about the 21 a day.
Right.
Is that still about the average suicides that we have of our vets per day?
Right now they feel that, and statistics are very hard because it's very hard for anybody to come forward, again, the stigma, but they feel that in America at any given time there are 800,000 veterans that are actively thinking of suicide. The percentage has increased. The average percentage of civilians thinking about suicide when they do the surveys, and we do them with teenagers too, and we've had some results that surprise you about how many teenagers who seem normal to their parents actually contemplate suicide on a regular basis. But right now the statistic is about 20 point something percentage of, I just looked at it this morning, of civilians active per 100,000 actively think about suicide. That's not teenagers, that's adults. That's
a huge amount.
In the veterans community, whether in service or out, it's 25.4% of veterans in or out of service per 100,000 that actively think about suicide.
And that's it. I would say the vets percentage is well above the average.
It is.
Of
is.
Normal, everyday citizens thinking of suicide.
Yes. And when we dealt with teenagers or had a suicide at the schools, I was part of a team that would go in there and talk to teenagers, and what we had is probably 70% of that junior high or high school were actively contemplating suicide because somebody else has taken their life.
Wow, that's a huge percentage. That's an amazing percentage.
Attitudes of teenagers and younger people is that if this person who I know, who seemed like he was better and smarter and better looking than me, would take his life, then what do I have to go on with? So they think in very simple terms about death, when they're faced with it, they simply think that this might be something that if this person didn't think life was worth living, then maybe I shouldn't think life is worth living either.
Very suggestible.
Absolutely suggestible.
We're going to take a 5-minute break and let my friend over here talk about the specials of the day at Pizzeria Brasileirissimo in town.
I can
Hola,
stop talking.
hola, good morning, hola.
Good morning.
Hola, this is every day, the beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day.
Yes. Pizzeria Restaurant Brasileirissimo. Open every day, 11 p.m. until 10 p.m. 11 a.m. until 10 p.m. It is a good day. It is excellent day to eat pizza, pasta, fish, meat, and delicious dessert from Brazilian. The Restaurante Pizzeria Brasileirissimo. You are located in the main street near the park in front of Big Daddy. You can your place. You can ask it for delivery by 6546-5663. 6546-5663. We have special dishes prepared especially for you. Filet mignon with it and the sauce roti, lasagna, special sauce, and fish, pasta, and pizzas. Very, very delicious, ever delicious for you. You have pasta with prawns.
Prawns, yeah.
Yes. My
One of
English
my
is very bad.
Oh, your English has gotten much better over the past 6 months or so. She really has gotten better with her English.
It sounds very well to me. Sounds better than my English, my Spanish.
Yes. You can for delivery every day, 11 p.m., 10 p.m. in 6546-5663. 6546-5663.
Muchas gracias, amiga. Everybody listen up. It's the weekend. Nobody wants to cook. Order your food from Pizzeria Brasileirissimo. They'll deliver it hot and fresh and good.
Yes.
Or stop by and pick up or dine in.
Oh, yes. Yes. Gracias, thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Muchas
Thank you.
gracias. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. God bless you.
Okay, so that was one of our local restaurants. We'd like to try and support our local restaurants. The restaurant business is suffering.
Yes.
The tourism business is suffering. The town is suffering. So
Yes, it is.
whatever you can, if you are able to, try and get local. Buy local from local stores. Buy from local restaurants. Take a break. Treat yourself. Right, Daniel?
I think that's a wonderful idea. My wife and I do it myself. We've had many restaurants here that have helped out with Panamanians when they're suffering from a lack of food, and they've supported different groups that my wife has, and I think that the only way to pay them back is simply go to their restaurants. You don't have to sit there. You can do takeout. I certainly do it, and I would, and my friends do too, so I hope everyone does.
Yeah, I mean, Big Daddy's is one of the ones that has helped a lot in the community.
Yes.
Sugar and Spice has helped a lot in the community. Tap Out, I guess, also kind of a sister business of Big Daddy's, has also offered their services. So we have a lot of good restaurants around here that are offering their services, and I'm sure I've left some out, so don't get mad at me.
I just like to mention Mike's Grill, because when I go on
Mike's
Facebook
Grill.
and mention the ones that have helped a lot, and I am also sure there's a lot of them that have done that. But us working in the community to try to help a school, we're helping quite a ways up with 35 families with food once a month.
Australia,
Those are the three gentlemen and three places that have helped the most. Those are the ones we've asked, but also my wife has gotten donations from just about every restaurant, Panamanian or expat, in the community to help us do that. Everyone's been amazing.
Exactly, the stores and everything, they've
Everyone.
helped. During the hurricanes, the restaurants helped as well.
Yes.
When people were displaced because of the hurricanes. I volunteer for the Red Cross. They did a great job too. So remember, there is a Red Cross office in town. Excuse me. So they're accepting any volunteers, whether you're an expat or a local. volunteer your services. If you have any special skills, volunteer your skills. We're looking for anyone to come volunteer. So we'll get back to our subject matter here. Now, getting back to the virus, getting away from the military PTSD, going back to the virus, we have been seeing a lot of people that are becoming depressed,
Yes.
getting PTSD, isolated in their homes, especially during the quarantine. What did this quarantine do to some people?
Isolation works different on different people. We have different adults have an ability to self-isolate. I'll give an example. A person like myself never feels lonely when I'm alone. So I'm a person that finds it very easy. My wife is a person that likes to get around and get out and help the community more often, is much more mobile, does hikes, things like that. And she's felt probably a little more isolated. So have her friends. So the more that you go out, the more the person that visits 5 restaurants a week versus the person that visits 1 restaurant a month is going to feel more of his freedom has been taken away from him.
Right.
And those type of freedoms are the way we cope in life. Going out with a hiking group is the way we cope on life. Visiting other countries in the area is the way we cope on life. When you take everything away from a person, or most things away from a person, and then you say, if you do those things, you could die, it causes depression. The severity of the depression depends on the person and the community surrounding him. It depends on your loved ones who call you from the States or you call each other. It depends on if you're, if you have an elderly single person in the community, you can check on them by phone. You don't necessarily have to do a face-to-face. Anything you do that makes you feel good about helping somebody else helps you ward off depression and anxiety. So, there's so many things people have taught. I do crossword puzzles. I'm doing woodworking. There are so many things. Gardeners do very well in this community because they can go out in their yard and do that. But even those people I've heard from that appear to be getting very depressed over the length of time it's taking us to come over COVID. We've had shots for polio, we've had shots for the flu, we've had pandemics before.
Yes.
But none of them have taken this long to get medication in us and to go back to a normal society. So I would say to the people that are feeling more depressed, are either sleeping too much or not enough. Those are the people that are starting to feel signs of depression. If that's happening to you, if your cleanliness is diminished somewhat because, what the hell, I see jokes on Facebook, I never get out of my pajamas. Well, that's fine if you feel well about it. But if you're starting to feel sad or somewhat lonely about doing things like that, then you need to have to find ways to feel better about your situation right now.
Right.
We were talking earlier about everybody appears to have a bubble, small or large. You're supposed to do it with only your own
under your own roof,
only group of family. It may be simply that the group you always had, you're doing phone communication or Facebook. That's what I do. I use Facebook. It's not the same as face-to-face, but it still makes you feel better about you're not as isolated. So my suggestion to getting food from the vendors here that have helped so much. I mean, eating something different and having somebody cook for you. I mean, that's a feeling of well-being. We've always
comfort food.
Right. We've always turned to that. Well, look at all the menus that are around on Facebook and simply pick something, if you can afford it, that makes you feel better about the day. There are just so many things you can still do to make yourself feel better.
There's people that like to get out and exercise, and while we were under quarantine, they weren't allowed to go walking or hiking or any of that kind of thing. How can they do the same get the same endorphins within their own home or within their own yard that going out and walking would have done?
So some people on Facebook are starting groups because they feel they're gaining weight because they're not able to do the same physical things they used to do. So they're actually starting groups, and you can form a group for 20 minutes a day of doing exercises. You don't necessarily have to show a video, but you could. There are videos for free online to do certain type of exercise. People are doing it alone with music or with their loved one. I mean, there's no question that when you increase your endorphins and feel better physically, you will feel better mentally. So you can still go to a walk in your neighborhood. You can still take your car somewhere and do an isolated walk, or just keep the 6-foot distance, even if there are people out there. There's nothing wrong with that if you're wearing a mask, distancing, and washing your hands. So those are some of the ways you can cope in life. Some people take up a hobby, or they simply look online for something they like about history or science, and they simply follow that. My wife uses podcasts. She follows different podcasts of things that interest her. It makes her feel closer. It's a form of learning, and when your brain learns, it also feels better about the physical self. There are so many things in your past that you've done that you can still do here, even though you're isolated.
And what do you have for suggestions for people like me that have to go out and work and that have that anxiety because we're being exposed? Any frontline worker, I'm not just talking to doctors or the police or the paramedics, but the supermarket workers, the restaurant workers, we're all out there exposing ourselves daily, and obviously we have our own anxieties too. That's the flip side of the coin, right? Everybody envies us because we can get out. We envy them because they can stay home.
It's truly not the flip side of the coin, because there's so much anxiety with healthcare workers or workers that serve us simply in restaurants or different places. No, you use the safety as much as possible. You certainly demand of others, whether you're a doctor or a nurse, that they take the same safety requirements. 6 feet away and wear a mask, and then you have all these hand sanitizers, and have them do it before they come in. But the feeling of anxiety for doing what you do to help people, it's a very difficult question on how you self-cope. Again, I would truly recommend that you visualize yourself as, how serious am I starting to feel about going out there in the community and doing this? What do I need to then do? You have all these type of things. I call them doors in your brain. Some doors are closed because they were too traumatic, and some are open because we simply need them right now. There is such history in your brain of things you can do when you cope. You just have to be self-aware that you're kind of starting down a little darkness.
Yeah.
And it's getting a little gray for you. Whether it's sitting outside and watching the sun, that's simply what I do.
I love the sunsets.
I read outside sun. The vitamins that are in it and sun will make you feel better. Seeing the sun come up or seeing it go down. So I always recommend that people go outside. You can obviously isolate and do all of the things that you used to do. You just, if it's a loved one to sit 6 feet away, continue to communicate with the people you care about. If it's an adult, another adult, and communicate with them just how you're feeling at times. Communication, talking about your feeling. Clinicians, psychologists, doctors are always taught early on to, to listen, to not give advice before the person is finished talking, because you learn so much before you give advice. You better learn how this person is feeling. So sharing how you feel with a significant other, whether it's a worker that you have, whether you're a doctor or another doctor, you can set up your own small groups as check-in groups once a week or a couple of times a week to just see how a person's feeling. That's an important element of human beings. Human beings need to communicate their feelings. Please don't do it, we were talking earlier, not with your children, but with another adult that has the